All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. I am the one who called the Something Ventured podcast the Silicon Valley podcast last week, which is really no kind of a name at all. Like saying it's the Nothing podcast. Nope, this is the Something podcast, the Something Ventured podcast. Part 2, Michael White and his thesis about why Silicon Valley is going to rule all sports.
But the thing is, his tactics roiled a lot of people in the NFL. He was very hated by a lot of other owners just because of his aggression and how he would, overpay people. And, he went out and made big splashes. That's the other thing, we talk about the Silicon Valley ethic. One of the sort of things I think that might be common to other businesses, but gets a lot of play in Silicon Valley is go out and hire the top people, right? That's something where that's where you spend your money.
Well, and he hired Carbon Policy was the guy, right?
Carbon Policy. Well, but Carbon Policy was sort of the consigliere from his family.
Okay.
But what he would do,
by the way, has a winery up in Yountville, I believe.
Well, there you go.
I believe it might be in the state. Up in
Youngstown, Ohio. That's why I kept trying to remember the name of the town.
Yeah.
Carbon Policy, also from Youngstown, Ohio. Anyway, big free agents like Steve Young took him from the USFL, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I guess he took them from. Deion Sanders, brought in these super high-priced free agents to do anything he could to win a championship. They won 5 Super Bowls in 14 years. And had he, not got caught handing a suitcase full of cash to a Louisiana a legislator or administrator, whoever was responsible for the gambling license for his riverboat casino, he would still be the owner of the team, and we'd still view him as a Silicon Valley type guy. But
it's a sad tale.
Yeah, that is a sad tale, unfortunately. But that's the idea with Goober and Lacob. They came in saying, this is how we're going to run this team. And that's what they did too. They made some big decisions early. They bought
the Warriors, which is the basketball team.
Warriors.
Who owned the Warriors before?
Named Chris Cohan.
Yeah.
And it was a disaster.
Right.
He was a disaster of an owner, like many owners are.
Yeah.
Frankly, when we're talking about this whole thing, what's a successful owner versus what's there are a lot of owners who think the successful owning of a professional sports team is the bottom line. Did we turn a profit this year? It doesn't matter how many games we lost or whether we're in last place. Did we turn a profit? And Goober and Lacob came in and they said, no, we're going to make this a winning team. And I think most successful franchises, you look at any of the really big historically successful franchises, even before Silicon Valley, the Dallas Cowboys, even the recent past, the New England Patriots, the Yankees. These are teams that sell out to win because they know winning on the field means you're going to attract fans, which means you're going to make money. And, Chris Cohan, he didn't get that. He wasn't good at being an owner.
Right.
And also, Lacob comes in to the Warriors and he says, I'm also going to be making all these decisions. And so he trades their most popular player, Monte Ellis.
Mm-hmm.
He brings in Andrew Bogut, a big man who had been, habitually injured throughout his career.
Right.
Everybody thought was going to be a huge mistake. They had already drafted Curry.
How did he make these decisions? Did he have prior basketball knowledge, or did he have a basketball guy?
Other bold moves. Yeah. Comes in. He immediately goes out and signs Jerry West, probably the dean of basketball, the most revered front office guy. He's for people who don't know who Jerry West is, they call him the logo. Because the NBA logo is a basketball player, and that was based on a picture of Jerry West.
Really?
He was such a great player that he became the NBA logo, and they call him the logo. Right. But a genius. He is a basketball, a Hall of Fame player, but also a really well-respected executive. He played for the Lakers. He worked for the Lakers for a long time, was retired, basically. Lacob goes out and gets him, signs him as a consultant.
Yeah.
Brings in a guy, Bob Evans, as
the sausage guy.
No. He's he was an agent. He brought in an agent to be the GM.
Yeah.
People, that is a bold move.
Yeah.
And you talk about Silicon Valley having the ethic of we're just going to bring the best people in. That's kind of a good example of going, well, I'm not going to just take a guy who was a GM at another franchise and got fired but was well respected. I'm going to bring in an agent to be my GM.
Yeah.
And they said, we don't need Monte Ellis. We have Steph Curry, who, even though was oft injured in his rookie and second year, had ankle problems and foot problems. People thought, oh, he might be a bust.
Yeah.
We're going to make him the cornerstone of our
franchise. Is Steph Curry the most recognized and liked person in sports now? Is that
not even close?
Really?
Yeah.
Who
is more
famous?
LeBron James is probably the most recognizable current sports star in the world,
but not likable.
Oh. I don't know if there is a likability index that we can refer to.
Yeah.
Steph Curry certainly is likable beyond the Golden State Warriors. He is marketable, and we're seeing it now. He's got I don't recall if Apple has ever hired an athlete for advertising purposes. But they hired Steph Curry. He's in an Apple commercial.
For what? Like a watch
I
thing
think
or
it's the iWatch, or whatever they call it.
Well, that's the other thing that I think the Silicon Valley guys do is they look at it as a complete product. And so their community outreach is pretty damn good. Like these guys show up at schools. I don't know, maybe they show up at a high school for 10 minutes or something, but it ends up on the news. Steph Curry, by all accounts, is a very nice guy who is seen around San Francisco with his kid and wife.
That certainly has to be part of it. I mean, it can't be a coincidence that Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Bogut, even Draymond Green these are all Warriors, having just won the championship, are also good guys.
Yep.
I think that's part of the marketing aspect.
The Giants baseball team's like that too.
Exactly. Now, the Giants are an interesting story because they're like the mature Silicon Valley company. Their ownership is very unlike Lacob and Goober with the Warriors, whereas Lacob and Goober, they came in, they made a splash. They did it in a very Silicon Valley way where they said, we're going to take big risks and we're going to just, basically 3-4 years ago, Joe Lacob came out on the floor at a game when they were
this is crazy.
Chris Mullin and introducing Chris Mullin, and people booed him. People thought he was nuts. He had traded Monte Ellis. He had brought in Andrew Bogut, who everybody knew was going to be a bust, and they had no faith in him. Obviously, the fans had just been through the Chris Cohan era, and he wasn't a great owner. And so 3 years later, championship, he's roundly lauded. So the Giants are such more of a long-term story.
But no, that event was crazy. The event with Lacob where he grabs the microphone.
Right. Because
people are booing.
Right. They are showering.
And he's like, this is my team. And what did he do? He grabbed the microphone and then he...
Well, he was introducing Chris Mullin. And he there wasn't much he could say because, they were booing him because he was just the new owner.
But he said something, right? Didn't he? Wasn't there a time when Lacob took the microphone and was like, hey, people, like, we're going to figure this out?
Right, that's what he said.
Like, something like that.
Don't worry. But, what could he say?
Yeah. But I think it shut a lot of people. A lot of people were like, whoa, what the...
Well, yeah.
This guy's like,
he's a venture capitalist.
Yeah, well, and by the way, built a company too, I think. I think he built a biotech company. Built something.
And they have a lot of guys. So, even though Lacob really runs the team, he probably is the most involved owner in Silicon Valley in sports. Whereas the Giants are probably the least involved ownership.
Yep.
In day-to-day decisions. But the executive board of the Warriors and the other part owner of the Warriors, all littered with Silicon Valley people, venture capitalists, CEOs, of companies.
Yep.
Whereas, the Giants are sort of the Silicon Valley success story that is now in sort of maintenance mode.
Yeah.
Because when they were about to leave in 1992, Peter McGowan, a Bay Area guy, CEO of Safeway, basically put together Silicon Valley royalty to buy the team. Yep. And
built their own stadium with their own money. They are over a longer period of time such a mirror of what Lacob is doing with the Warriors. They came in. They had a political problem building a new stadium. So from 1993 until 1999, they knew they were stuck in
Candlestick Park, and they lost money.
Which was a horrible, cold ballpark.
Horrible, cold,
The stadium.
old,
So in the 70s, the stadium model was you put a big
multi-purpose.
big multi-purpose stadium in the middle of a parking lot where everybody
Away from the city center.
away from the city center, everyone would drive, and then the new ballpark, the new baseball park, is near a lot of public transportation. There's a parking lot there. It's half full on a sold out game because everyone's taking the ferry and the train and
Right. So even
the
though
subway.
they come in with this Silicon Valley, laden these Bay Area royalty sort of ownership group, they weren't successful for the first 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
They basically did the best they could. They made their splashes. They signed Barry Bonds, the most popular and best player in baseball, at that time. They did what they could with the stadium. They put as many good players around him, and they had their version of success. They made the playoffs a few times between then and 2000. But you're right. The sort of boldest move they made in 2000 was to build a downtown stadium for baseball only and finance it themselves. And people don't realize that a mere 15 years later, how unheard of that was.
Yep.
That a sports team by themselves, they did get the land from the city.
Yep.
They did have Willie Brown.
Thank you, Willie Brown, yes.
The all-star mayor of San Francisco, mayor for life of San Francisco.
Yeah, and formerly Speaker of the House in California.
Right.
A man who knows his way around politics.
No, to say the least.
Yeah.
Who did help them push that stadium through over some of the regulatory hurdles, because let's face it, it was a rail yard and there are some bad things under the soil there.
Right.
But they did it. And that, talk about a Silicon Valley move, where they basically said, we're not going to wait around to try and get voters to vote us a publicly financed stadium. What we're going to do is we're going to go get the land. We're going to go finance it ourselves. And that, I don't think people realize today what a bold move that was. And it had made all the difference, of course. And sure, they made one World Series in 2002, but didn't have a great amount of success for the next 10 years, except that they did on their terms, which was they had Barry Bonds, the most popular player in baseball, the best player in baseball, who was chasing a home run record.
Yep.
And so they basically sacrificed winning championships to build a team around him to pursue those records.
Right.
And they're no dummies. They made a ton of money. And you can't blame them also for coming out of the windy, cold, forsaken Candlestick Park, where they were losing money like crazy, have a bunch of debt to service on their new ballpark in downtown San Francisco. Let's let them make money for a little while.
Right.
And so they've been profitable ever since they've been in AT&T Park. You never know how much they're profitable.
Well, and by the way, years later, Barry Bonds gets swept up, part of a doping scandal.
Of course, everyone knew that, but everyone in baseball was on board with it.
Yeah, well, I don't believe the checks are being returned to the people who went and watched Barry Bonds.
Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1994 were, the toast of baseball.
Yeah.
And Barry Bonds almost grew to the home run record in anonymity behind those two, hitting home runs, but not being involved in that sort of 94 through 97, heavy steroid era. But the idea is the Giants got on board because they filled that stadium with people who are coming to see Barry Bonds because they had the biggest attraction in baseball.
Yeah.
Granted, they weren't selling out to win championships, but they were doing everything they could to maximize the most popular player in baseball and the biggest attraction in baseball, love him or hate him. And so they did, and they made money hand over fist, and they continue to today. I mean, it's interesting, the ownership group that was around back then, the guy who made all that happen, was very much a Silicon Valley guy, Peter McGowan, but not really. I mean, Peter McGowan's grandfather is Charles Merrill, Merrill Lynch.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And his dad was the CEO of Safeway before he was. And, he put an ownership group together that had, Levi's, the Chronicle, Gap, all these huge bears. But the two biggest guys that no one ever talked about really, who had the most of the team, were the chairman and CEO of Franklin Templeton.
Oh, really?
Who are also Bay Area royalty. It's based in San Mateo, Franklin Templeton is.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. One guy named Burns, he was the vice chairman at the time back in '92 when they bought into the team, and Charles Johnson, whose father founded Franklin Templeton, who now is the majority owner of the Giants. Not a lot of people realize that there's really one owner of the Giants, and it's a guy. But these were like Bay Area royalty, and they put their trust in McGowan and later in Larry Baer to operate the team sort of as a Silicon Valley entity, and they were hugely successful.
Well, and I suspect one of the other things that will happen. So there's a lot of guys who have a lot of money in Silicon Valley, and they're all here in Silicon Valley, and they're all looking at each other. We're talking about playing golf. They don't play golf. They all took up like cycling at the same time. So they like, if they're doing one thing, they're all doing it. So I bet there's a lot more guys interested in owning a team now that Lacob and Chamath and all these guys are Warriors owners. I bet there's a lot of guys going, okay, can I get in on
surely
something, something
even
else?
When you look at the Sharks, for instance, the Sharks in San Jose, in the heart of Silicon Valley, they have a fair number of, have always had, actually, for the first 10 years or so that they were here, they were owned by a guy who came from Minnesota, Gund. He was an NHL owner previously.
Sounds right for a hockey team.
Right, exactly.
Guy named Gund from Minnesota.
Malls, again, real estate guys. Yeah. But then when they bought him out, it was a consortium of VCs and CEOs. And still today, even though the guy who owns the Sharks, the majority owner, is the German guy. He's the founder of SAP. A guy named Hasso Plattner.
Yep.
They've had some success, pre-Hasso Plattner.
Yeah.
He bought the team. Well, I think he was an investor, but I think he took over the team as majority owner. And he runs the team himself, almost kind of like Lacob does.
Oh, interesting.
But he does it from Germany. He's a German resident, can only spend a third of the year here, so isn't here very often.
It's funny, the software guy buys the Silicon Valley team anyway.
Right, but it's not a Silicon Valley company.
Yep.
SAP is very much a German company. It's very much a huge company.
Yep.
And while they might have some great technology, and obviously they're sponsoring the stadium too, it's now the SAP Center.
Oh, right.
It used to be the HP Center.
Right.
Now it's the SAP Center. I don't think he's playing. I think he kind of made it clear when he took over the team that he wants to turn a profit.
Yeah.
And, did not fire the GM that came with the team. So isn't sort of wanting a guy who's going to mold the team on the ice in his image. He did fire the coach, but brought in a guy who's kind of untested. So he could turn out to be Steve Kerr, the coach of the Warriors, who's a genius and everybody thinks is great. Or he could just be a guy who was brought in because he's good at managing existing sets of players.
Right.
And they're really more concerned about making the organization profitable than winning on the ice. There are still a couple of guys. There's a former Sun Micro CEO, still owns part of the team.
Really?
But I don't think he has any power. And the guys that got bought out were the guys who were actually running the team, and they were VCs. They were, I think, operating the team at a loss to try to win. And a lot of people say they failed because, the Sharks didn't win a Stanley Cup. But man, they were in the playoffs every year.
Yeah.
They made it often, and painfully often made it to either the conference championship and lost, or were the best team in hockey for the entire season and then got tossed out of the playoffs early. So it was painful, but you can't say that these guys who are running the team, who were, aggressive owners and made some aggressive moves, weren't trying to win.
Yep.
I think it was pretty widely known that they were also losing millions of dollars every year.
Well, yeah, and there's another Silicon Valley guy who runs Salesforce, Mark Benioff, who enters this equation. So Mark Benioff, fabulously wealthy founder of Salesforce,
right,
and is very focused on San Francisco, Bay Area, but San Francisco in particular, in giving money back to his local community. So, for example, a lot of these companies have lunch. You got the quinoa salad being made by the Grateful Dead chef. He doesn't do that because he wants his employees to go out and spend money with local businesses in San Francisco. They're based in San Francisco, and he actually chides other wealthy people who kind of give a lot of money to global health and things like that. They're important. But he's like, don't forget, like to give money. So the children's hospital here is the the Benioff
Right,
Hospital, or whatever.
exactly.
So as I understand it, they were trying to get a stadium built for the basketball team, the Warriors, in the city, and the city was like, being a city.
Right.
And I believe that Mark Benioff gave the land that he owned, sold it to Lakem,
Right.
to do it. So
Right.
So you've got the reinforcing thing of not only having a lot of wealth in there, but a lot of other powerful, wealthy people on your side.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. These moves that Lacob made coming into the Warriors, they weren't just on the court. They are community sort of. When he talks about hiring the best people, well, the Giants do this as well. That includes hiring people who will sort of be outreach to the fans as well, and that's a classic one, Silicon Valley move that Lacob did. Lacob comes in, he sees the Warriors are stuck in the Oakland arena it's old and it's subpar, and he'll never get the stadium he wants there. He doesn't wait for anybody. He goes and buys property in San Francisco near Pier 32, 33, near basically AT&T Park where the Giants play.
Right.
And runs into a bunch of opposition, he realizes soon that he's up against too much there. And Benioff comes and saves the day and says, by the way, I have this piece of property here just south of AT&T Park that'll be perfect for your stadium. And they're going ahead with it without, sort of looking around and seeing if it's okay. They're being very aggressive. They're still going to face a lot of opposition to their stadium because the property that Benioff gave him is right across the street from UC Medical Center.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, you can't build a stadium across the street from a hospital because, you can't create traffic problems for ambulances trying to get there. And so they're going to have to work that out. But that's a perfect example of a Silicon Valley guy going, we need a new stadium. Let's just go find a piece of property where we want.
Yeah.
Let's go do it.
Well, so it seems like one of the competitive advantages Silicon Valley teams will have is that there's multiple people pulling for them and invested in them. So if you look at, like, say some sports team in whatever, Chicago, owned by a family, they're a rich family, but they're kind of on their own. They've probably got a son involved who isn't quite as bright as the guy who built like that story. Where Silicon Valley has multiple self-made people owning and looking to advance, which is very much like Silicon Valley, right? Uber has 100 investors who would like Uber to succeed, would like to do legislative things, would like to do financial things, would like to help them succeed. It seems so too. The organizations like the Warriors, organizations like the Giants, have multiple wealthy, self-made people pulling for them, which you do not have in every other city.
You should see the list of, and that's the thing. We talk about Lacob as the owner of the Warriors, but the list of people who are part owners and executive board, it's an all-star. Silicon Valley roster. Same with the Giants. The Giants, it's a little more old school. But they were very strategic. When Peter McGowan in '92 put that ownership group together, he was a Safeway guy, so not a high tech guy, but they had one of the most legendary venture capitalists, a guy named Arthur Rock, as part of their ownership group. They had, the Franklin Templeton guys. It was very much a group of local, interested, people, and intentionally so. They bring the Chronicle in because they know they're going to need people in the media that know how to promote the team. They bring in the radio station, the longtime radio station that they play their games on is an investor in the team.
Really?
So they can create that kind of sort of synergy. They were very conscious of that. And as they've morphed over time, they've kept those people involved. One of the interesting things is, we talk about the Midwestern land developer whose son now runs the team or whatever. You still need some of those guys. So on the ownership roster of the Giants, even though Charles Johnson owns most of the team, one of the guys who owns one of the largest commercial construction companies in San Francisco, a guy named Nibby, Larry Nibby, you'll see his signs everywhere as buildings are being put up in San Francisco. Part owner of the team. Well, guess what? They were building a stadium in San Francisco. Nice to have a guy on board who does commercial development in San Francisco to help you out with that. So
Right.
it's, they did exactly that with their ownership group, which is let's take all these super smart local guys who care about the community and care about this team and put them together as owners who then will be interested in making the team a success. One of the funny side notes is there was a guy who didn't quite fit that description. He was a clothing company owner. A guy, his last name is Bayer. I wish I could remember what his first name is. Bayer Clothing Company. It was a pretty successful clothing company. One of the original investors in the Giants, local company. And in 1997, when the Giants were making moves to build a stadium on King and Third,
Yeah.
he buys the building across the street,
Yeah.
this large brick building, which now houses a couple of bars and restaurants and is in an area of town that's revitalized. He probably turned an immense profit on that.
Yep.
He's just because, hey, these are guys who are not dumb,
Yeah.
So, yeah, he owns, if you've ever been to AT&T Park, Pete's and Pedro's.
Oh, yeah.
That building that they're
Right
in,
across the street.
right across the street.
And now there's right next to Pete's and Pedro's, there's a empty lot, or used to be an empty lot. It's going to be a luxury hotel now.
There you go.
Going right across the
Exactly.
street.
That's
So,
now valuable.
It seems like the big Silicon Valley advantage, unlimited capital is one of them.
True. Yeah.
A sort of Silicon Valley management style, which is not like an old family inherited the money company, but a self-made guy, woman, not yet, but will be, that's like, hey, yeah, I need a stadium, so I'm going to go make it happen in an entrepreneurial way. And then multiple people looking out for the interest of a team in the Bay Area.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the ownership group theory too, because the Giants, when they were transitioning between the first 7 years that they spent in the cavernous, old, horrible Candlestick Park, they were building their new stadium. They were losing money. There was some people. So in '92, they bought the Giants for $100 million. Some people say they lost $100 million for the next 7 years while they were in Candlestick Park. Now we don't know this for sure. These are all private books,
of course,
so hearsay. But then they had to bring on more investors in 2000 as they were moving into the new stadium because they needed to, be aggressive about that move, and they couldn't build a stadium, make a big splash by being the first Major League Baseball team to finance their own downtown stadium and build this beautiful ballpark, and then cut the payroll of the team on the field and lose for 10 years.
Right.
So nobody wants to come to your new stadium. So they brought on sort of three or four investors who sort of are the more new school Silicon Valley owners. They brought them on, and they took on probably another $100 million from new investors in the group to get the team through that transition. So, it is the group thing. Whereas you're talking about, let's say the family in the Midwest. Well, if they're going to make big moves, if they're going to make a splash, if they're going to want to go fast, the family's probably going to be the one putting the money up. They're not talking about bringing other investors into the group. So it is also a kind of a very Silicon Valley thing to share the wealth, to get other people involved in your venture. As you were saying, Uber has 100 investors,
a lot of people pulling for it,
exactly,
probably including Templeton.
And as you know, in running a company, they don't all come in at the beginning. There are stages you go through where you're going to need to bring on new investors and new equity and launch you into the next phase. And I think these ownership groups understand that. And that was a big thing for the Giants, getting them from crappy old Candlestick Park to brand new shiny stadium. And let's make the team a success by infusing it with capital. And look at what has happened since 2000. In 15 years, they went through the whole bonds things where people could say, well, they only made one World Series. That's not very successful. But they weren't trying to, basically. They were maximizing the biggest draw in baseball until he retired in 2007. You look at them since 2007, 3 World Series, one of the most successful franchises in all of sports. They fill the stadium every night. They have, a hundreds of games long sellout streak in that. And so, that's the mentality is infuse the capital, get other people involved, do it quickly. That you don't find in other places.
Do athletes want to come to San Francisco or the Bay Area? I mean, Does it matter? $18 million, you want to go in it? Yeah.
Interestingly, athletes are still very self-interested,
Yeah.
and it's this the Giants and the Warriors and the Sharks are very beholden to the facts of life. The Giants play in a stadium that is the toast of baseball. People love it because you can see the Bay Bridge and the bay from your seat, but it's a terrible place to play if you're a hitter.
Okay.
And so even though they've won 3 World Series in 5 years,
it's near the water, heavy air, that whole thing.
the dimensions of the ballpark make it hard to be a good hitter, especially a right-handed power hitter. You're right; the weather plays a big part of it. But on the other hand, it's great for pitchers. So they can sign pitchers, but they haven't. So they're still subject to that. They're not beating people away who want to come here and play. And it's the same. In every sport, you're subject to the rules of the sport, which limit free agent movement, basically to keep the Yankees from stockpiling all the talent. And you've got salary caps, and you've got teams' ability to keep their own stars. And so the Warriors are up against that. But that's why the team on the court is the moves they made are so impressive with the Warriors, because in the NBA, that's one of the harder leagues to build a roster, right? 5 guys on the floor at one time means that you're more affected by the play of a single person, and a fewer number of people can take you from a terrible team to a good team. And so they've really done a good job. Like I said, these moves that they've made, that people thought were crazy, bringing in Bogut, who's been terrific, bringing in players who no one has ever heard of who are contributing. And they are bold moves in that other teams wouldn't have tried them because of conventional wisdom. Steph Curry was not viewed as a point guard or a guy whose body could even last an 82-game season. People... When they hung basically the responsibility, this is only 3 years ago, by the way, they hung the responsibility for the team on Curry and Thompson, 2 guards. People said, jump shooting teams don't win NBA championships. You need big men and you need athletic guys. And, they just shot their way to an NBA championship. And as we speak today, November, whatever, they're 8-0, the only undefeated team in basketball right now, because they're the best jump shooting team that we may ever see in the NBA. So that's the kind of thing where you're tied down by your sport.
Now, will they lose this season?
No. They won't. I mean, that's the thing. When you build a team for success, that's someone. Of course, Twitter's always good for little nuggets of turns of phrase. But I'm gonna misquote this. Someone. A writer that I like a lot named Tim Dickinson tweeted something the other day, and I'm going to screw it up, and I apologize in advance to him, but he said, the Warriors have this year that rare combination of team coming off of a championship season, but fuck you, nobody believes in us.
Right.
You don't often get that, because so much of sports is... Everybody tries to be the underdog and says nobody believed in us. But hey, you were the champions last year. But people have come into the season saying, well, the Warriors were basically a fluke. They won because they were good and they jump shot their way to the Western title, but Cleveland was injured and they didn't have players and LeBron couldn't carry them himself. And so everyone was basically making excuses the entire offseason why the Warriors weren't going to be a long-term success. But you look at the team, you look at Lacob, what he's done, where they're going with their management. I mean, you basically had their head coach who is, they, in addition to all these things on the court, Lacob comes in. Mark Jackson is their coach who took them to 2 successful years in a row for the first time in decades that they were that winning for 2 years in a row. He fires him and brings in Steve Kerr, who had never coached a team before. Mm-hmm. They win the NBA championship. This year, Kerr is out because he's, lying on his back, having fluid drained from something. I don't understand what his back problem is. They have their assistant coach, Luke Walton, coaching the team to an undefeated record so far. So it's this, they have built this team for the long haul, and it's not an accident that they're winning. And that's why I say, I love that quote, because they get to still play with a chip on their shoulder because people still don't believe in them. So, and, everybody has their problems, but ownership groups who view that as a challenge and say, no, we're going to build something that lasts for the long haul. That, they do that, and, other franchises use it as an excuse to fail.
So it's inevitable.
It is. Someday.
All
What we have to do is get rid of the bad owners, because we didn't even talk about the Oakland A's, which is one of the worst ownership groups in all of sports, who are just, terrible to their fans and terrible almost on purpose.
Yeah.
But that's a long story.
Yeah. Well, so it does seem like there is a case to be made that there's an amount of capital, there's a management style, and there's a group mentality.
It is.
That makes it inevitable.
It is those core things. And like I said, it's not that other businessmen from other businesses, like I said, Bob Kraft sells razors for a living, and he built the New England Patriots into in the NFL. Well, as I said earlier, in the NFL, it's harder to be an individual success as a team because your revenue is all
TV money.
Yeah, the TV money all comes through the NFL. You share all the revenue from marketing and sales of jerseys, etc. Yet he built this hugely successful team both on and off the field, and even before all this revenue sharing and stuff in football. The Cowboys were America's team. Jerry Jones, who might or might not be a smart guy, was raking in the money, capitalizing on the fact that the Cowboys were quote unquote America's team.
Yeah,
and he had to give up millions of dollars to allow the NFL to do singular marketing and that kind of thing. So, it's not that other guys in other places that are in other businesses can't do this as well. It is that unique, though, sense of group investment that we're in a hurry to succeed.
Yep.
We have a shorter time frame than other businesses in Silicon Valley. We got to build fast, and we got to succeed fast, and we got to get the best people at all costs. And it's basically let's 24/7 go out and look for the best ideas and the best people, and go all out. That is unique to Silicon Valley.
This is good. I think this rises more to the level now of a theory than a hypothesis. Now that I've heard it. I think this is good. This is an epic podcast.
We'll see.
If it survives 5 years, people can come back.
There you go.
Listen to this podcast.
You can test the hypothesis.
And you will look like a genius.
How many championships will have been won from Bay Area teams?
All right. Well, thanks for doing this.
You bet. And I'm sorry to everyone who was bored by it and hates sports.
I don't think anyone's going to be bored. Well, someone will be bored by it, but not everyone.
Well, they tuned out already. That's the beauty of
the beauty of the podcast. All right. Well, this has been the Something Venture podcast. My guest, Michael White. Thanks a lot.